According to the Bible, most of Jesus' miracles occurred in the north, in the Galilee. But there were two very special miracles that occurred here at Jerusalem. Next, on Israel, the prophetic connection. This place, the Mount of Olives, very near. Fulfilling the prophecy, waiting for the day when the Messiah will come. The walls that you can see behind me are at least 3,000 years old. They were part of the stronghold of Zion, or the city of Siloam, which was Jerusalem's first name. We know that 3,000 years ago, King David came here with his army and he captured the stronghold of Zion. But this fortress had incredible defenses. The walls were 70 feet high, surrounded on three sides by valleys. And yet David knew the city had a weakness through its water shaft, and his men managed to exploit that weakness and enter the city. But in doing so, David put a curse on the lame and the blind that were in this Jebusite city. In fact, it was the lame and the blind who were used to taunt David's men. The Jebusites, thinking that no one can capture their city, taunted David and said, even the blind and the lame among us can resist you. We don't need, if you like, strong soldiers. Well, it seems that in capturing the city, David cursed the lame and the blind. And that curse may have lasted for 1,000 years. And it's reflected in a question that was asked of Jesus when he came here 1,000 years after King David. John 9, verse 1. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And that question may have had its origin in the curse that David put on the lame and the blind right here, 1,000 years before the question was asked.
While the Bible claims that Jesus performed many miracles, most of these happened in northern Israel, in the region of the Sea of Galilee. According to the biblical account, only 2 miracles occurred within the walls of Jerusalem. The first of these, the healing of a paralyzed man by the pool of Bethesda, near the temple, took place on a Sabbath day. This caused an uproar because the religious authorities saw it not only as a desecration of the sacred temple area, but also as a violation of the 10 Commandments, especially the one that declared, "Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy."
In the creation of the world, we see that it says, and there was evening and there was morning, day 1. So in Jewish tradition, the biblical tradition, our days start in the evening, the night before. So Friday night, as the sun goes down, the Sabbath begins. Friday night into Saturday day until Saturday night. And Saturday night is really already Sunday. So Jews celebrate Shabbat starting Friday night with sundown all the way through Saturday. And that time, that 24, 25 hours is the most blessed time of the week.
So the Sabbath is a unique Jewish invention. We invented the weekend, but it's the idea that there's 6 normal work days of the week, which are mirrored by the 6 days of creation, when God, so to speak, worked, did all the labor of reading the story of creation. And on the 7th day, whatever that means, God rests.
The Sabbath began with our relationship with God. It's in the 10 Commandments. You ask anyone, would you kill, would you lie, would you steal? They would all say, no, 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 that's the 10 Commandments. But if you ask them, well, what about the Sabbath? Do you observe the Sabbath? Do you guard the Sabbath? Do you sanctify the Sabbath? And many people would say, wait a minute, I don't really know about the Sabbath. Isn't that a Jewish thing? And so the Sabbath is of the 10 Commandments. It's our bond with God. It's remembering that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the Sabbath. And so throughout 6 days, we work and we influence and we change the world and we do. And on Sabbath, we stop doing and we start being.
The observation of the weekly Sabbath was an essential part of Jewish life. Every Jew had a sacred obligation to keep it as a holy day reserved for fellowship with God.
One of the things I love the most about living in Jerusalem is the Sabbath. I mean, everything stops. We can hear sounds right now outside this building, but on the Sabbath, everything's quiet. No traffic, the stores are closed, and you're forced to kind of get quiet. And I just love it. And you know, the Sabbath is important. The Sabbath was established for us long before the law came to Moses at Mount Sinai. God rested on the seventh day, the Sabbath, after creating the world. And so he laid down that principle for us who are in his image. We're to take a break. We're to take a weekly stop of everything so that we can contemplate the goodness of God, to contemplate who he is and what he's done for us. And I love it. And you don't feel guilty stopping on the Sabbath all of your activities. It's just a natural thing, and I get rejuvenated and excited about going back to work after the day is over.
By emulating the Almighty, you are first of all testifying to the most basic fundamental point of Jewish worldview, that there's a God and he created the world. And it actually is, it's called when you make the kiddush over the wine, the blessing over the wine on Friday night, you talk about it's a zecher l'maseh v'reshit. It's a remembrance of the act of creation and a testimony to the fact that ultimately God runs the world. And even when we don't work for a week, because the tendency is we think that, you know, the world depends on us doing stuff. The idea is you take a day off, you do nothing creative, and people misunderstand the whole concept of what working on Shabbat is. But when you don't do creative labor, the world continues to run without you because the master of the universe has everything totally under control.
By healing a paralyzed man on the Sabbath day, especially in full public view at the pool of Bethesda and so close to the temple, Jesus was making a statement that shook long-standing Sabbath traditions.
When I read John 5, 1-8, the healing of the disabled person, of the impotent person in the pools of Bethesda, again, there's a reading here if you read about Sabbath, because you say, wait, Jesus kept Shabbat so well as a traditional Jew in his time, he wouldn't dare do anything, any kind of work from the forbidden 39 different actions that his people at that time actually forbidden people to work. There's 39 different deeds and actions, which still today is known as a no-do for Shabbat. But then, if you look at the beginning of that time, the end of Second Temple period, is exactly when we are frameworking something new in Judaism. And he's I would say, the avant-garde, the pioneer to give us a new understanding. And that is, when you save someone, any kind of thing which you do for saving one soul of the Jewish people at that time, you're actually entitled to break Shabbat. You're actually entitled to overcome the Shabbat commands. And the Shabbat commands were the highest among highest things in Judaism. But from his time on, and he would be the first pioneer to do so, and then it came, I would say, firming very, very strongly into Judaism tradition, is you can fight in Shabbat. You can cook on Shabbat. You can do anything on Shabbat if it's meant to save lives.
That Jesus chose to heal a paralyzed man on the Sabbath day seems to have been his way of saying that the value of an individual life was greater even than the law of Moses. That Israeli soldiers today go to war even on the Sabbath is but a modern example of a higher value of protecting and saving lives, even if doing so occurs at the expense of Sabbath observance.
During the operation in Gaza right now, we had thousands upon thousands of people working in Shabbat, wearing a yarmulke, religious people, and you say, how come? Because they're working under a different understanding, that this is meant to save people's lives. And people's lives is even beyond keeping the Shabbat. And I would say Jesus here is an avant-garde pioneering understanding. In his time, this was an overwhelming thing to do. Afterwards, if you read the Bible, it became traditional. You can save people on Shabbat.
The second recorded miracle of Jesus in Jerusalem occurred when he placed mud packs on a blind man's eyes and then told the man to go and wash his eyes in the pool of Siloam, yet another very public place.
When we address this thing of pool of Siloam, I think if I perceive Jesus fully and understanding his method and way of teaching, is the pool of Siloam was a significant place to be seen, and people should know what you have done. Because if you just cure him on the spot in that street, it might be that nobody knows. If you do remember the teaching that he gives his disciples is, they ask him what this Man, what has he done? What was his sin? And then he says, neither him nor his parents sinned anything, neither against God nor against Jerusalem or its people. It is for the Lord to show his power by giving him that disable and then, sending him off that disability, which is curing him. Only then can he comprehend something. The pool of Siloam was a significant spot in the whole tradition of Jerusalem because every pilgrim, when coming to Jerusalem, would actually bathe in the pool of Siloam on the way to the temple. So if you wish to do something today, do it in, Fifth Avenue or Times Square, so people can actually know about it. Do it in the middle of Toronto. Don't do it elsewhere in the field where nobody knows. I think it is a significant understanding that the pool of Siloam serves PR. It serves something of the understanding that it needs to be seen, it needs to be shown to the people.
Jesus did miracles because he's the miracle worker. That's part of his nature, is to do miracles. But he also did miracles to prove that, in fact, he is the Messiah. The rabbis, those who expected the Messiah to come, saw him as one, if he's the true Messiah, who would do great wonders. And Jesus proved himself to be that Messiah.
Since the Jewish expectations of the Messiah were of an individual with supernatural abilities, Jesus seems to have used miracles to prove that he was precisely whom he claimed to be, the Son of the living God, and the fulfillment of what all the Hebrew prophets had said about the coming Messiah. That the timeline of history is divided into two parts by his birth, BC before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, a Latin expression for in the year of our Lord, is perhaps the best example of how our world has been influenced by this one solitary life. The life of an itinerant carpenter from Nazareth in Galilee, who forever changed our world by his words and deeds.
According to the Gospel of St. John, two very special miracles occurred in Jerusalem. The first is found in John chapter 5, and in fact it occurred at the pool of Bethesda. That also means place of mercy, which is much higher up. I'm standing at the city of David, where Jerusalem began, on the lower slopes, but higher up on Mount Moriah, where the temple once stood, and on the other side of the temple, the pool of Bethesda is located. And this miracle occurred there. John 5, verse 1, after this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. All male Jews were required to come to Jerusalem at least 3 times a year for 3 of the special feasts: Passover, Shavuot, which is our Feast of Pentecost in the Christian world, and also the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, meaning the place where the sheep were brought in for sacrifice, which is called in the Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had. So miracles occurred all the time after angels touched the water in the pool of Bethesda. Verse 5, now a certain man who had an infirmity 38 years, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I am coming, another steps down before me. You can hear the disappointment in this man's voice. He just couldn't get there quickly enough. And each time a miracle occurred, it was for someone else and not for him. It was like he was passed over time and again. But it seems that God was watching him all the time. Verse 8, Jesus said to him, rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. John is emphasizing that to take up one's bed and walk was violating the commandments. It was deemed as work on the Sabbath. And so John wants to emphasize that point. And of course, what happens in verse 10, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed." He answered them, "He who made me well said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" Then they asked him, "Who is the man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. So Jesus comes into this open area where many sick, blind, lame people are. And he chooses one man in particular who'd been in this condition for such a very long time and who had experienced so many disappointments. Why did he choose that particular man of all the other people there that really needed a miracle? Well, perhaps there's a connection. When we move to John chapter 9, we find this other interesting passage about a second miracle that Jesus did. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" The question reflects the mentality of the day. If a man, a woman, if they're born with a physical malady, defect of some kind, blindness or lameness, there's a reason for it. Somebody sinned, either they sinned or their parents sinned. It's in their genealogical tree, if you like, or their spiritual tree. But there has to be sin in the family for someone to be born in this way. And Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said these things, this is very interesting that Jesus would do this. He spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva. Now we know that Jesus could perform miracles with a word. There were those that were healed at a distance simply because he chose to heal them. But here he has a blind man go through an exercise. So he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, the saliva mixed with the earth. And he said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." Now I'm standing very close to the pool of Siloam. It's down in the lower valley, in fact at the bottom of the city of David. And when the pilgrims came to Jerusalem, they washed themselves, this ritual washing, in the pool of Siloam. And it was a large area, so it was very familiar to the people of Jerusalem and the people coming to Jerusalem. They would come there and wash. And so the street from here to there would have been very busy with people either leaving the city or ascending up onto the Temple Mount. And Jesus has this man find his way in his blindness all the way down there. But he has to do it in obedience if he's going to be healed. And so it says that Jesus sent him to the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, "Is not this he who sat and begged?" Some said, "This is he." Others said, "He is like him," because obviously something changed. He could see where before he couldn't see, and his whole expression was so much different. Presumably he was full of joy instead of sadness. He said, the man, "I am he." Therefore they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed, and I received sight." Two miracles in close proximity, each to the other, and in order according to John's Gospel, the first in chapter 5 and the second in chapter 9. And why did Jesus heal these two men here at Jerusalem? When we go back to 2 Samuel chapter 5, to the city of David, 1,000 years before Jesus performed the miracles, we find King David's soldiers in the valley below trying to take this fortress, the stronghold of Zion, represented by the high walls you see behind me, but you're only seeing part of the walls because they were at least 70 feet high. And this was a very well fortified city. And that's why David's men and David were taunted by those Jebusites who lived in the city. They never thought for a minute that anyone could take the city from them, but David did. But in doing it, it seems that he cursed the lame and the blind. And that may have gone into the mentality of the Jewish people from that moment on, down through history, even for 1,000 years, that prompted Jesus' disciples to ask that question: who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? He was born this way. And Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents, but this is for the glory of God. And could it be that Jesus, the direct descendant of King David, 1,000 years later, in doing these two miracles, lifts the curse that stood for 1,000 years? We know that Jesus performed significant miracles here at Jerusalem, but he performed many more miracles in Galilee at the outset of his ministry. But why did he do miracles in the first place? Was it to demonstrate who he was, that he had the power of God? We read that when his ministry began in the Galilee, he went to Capernaum and began to do miracles there. There was a man in the synagogue with an unclean spirit, a demon, and Jesus cleansed that man of that demon spirit. He also healed Simon Peter's mother-in-law and did many more miracles after that. In fact, we read in Mark's Gospel in chapter 1 and verse 32, at evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon-possessed. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he did not allow the demons to speak because they knew him. In the spiritual realm, the realm of unclean spirits and demonic spirits, they knew exactly who Jesus was. And then we read in verse 35, now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he, Jesus, went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon, this is Simon Peter the fisherman, and those who were with him searched for him. When they found him, they said to him, everyone is looking for you. And you can imagine what happened during the night. During the long night, people came from all the surrounding towns and villages, bringing the sick, the diseased, the demon-possessed, wanting their relatives to be healed in the same way other people had been healed the day before. But to their great dismay, Jesus was no longer in Capernaum. He had gotten up early and was up in the hills, and the disciples had to go and find him there. And so expecting Jesus perhaps to return to Capernaum and start over where he had left off the night before, he didn't do that. But he said to them in verse 38, let us go into the next towns that I may preach there also, because for this purpose I have come forth.